As I drove home late one eerie night, the dense silence of the countryside enveloped me. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the hum of my engine. Then, without warning, my car spluttered and shuddered, as if protesting against the solitude. I pulled over to the side of the deserted country road, cursing my luck as I realized I had no cell service. The nearest sign of civilization, a flickering porch light from a distant farmhouse, seemed miles away. With a sigh, I stepped out into the chilly night air, my breath misting in front of me. The faint glow of the stars above provided little comfort as I began my lonely trek towards the distant beacon of hope. Each step felt like an eternity, amplified by the silence that seemed to press in from all sides. After what felt like an hour of walking, I heard the distant hum of an engine approaching from behind. Relief washed over me as I turned and saw headlights piercing through the darkness. I waved frantically, hoping for rescue. The car slowed, its headlights casting long shadows across the road, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the silhouette of a driver peering out from behind the windshield. My hopes were dashed when, instead of stopping to help, the car suddenly accelerated, veering towards me with alarming speed. Heart pounding, I leaped into the roadside ditch just as the vehicle roared past, missing me by inches. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I scrambled to my feet, eyes wide with shock and fear. The car screeched to a halt a short distance ahead, its brake lights briefly illuminating the road behind me. Frozen in place, I watched as the car sat idle for a moment before abruptly speeding off into the night. Shaken to the core, I hesitated before cautiously resuming my journey towards the distant farmhouse, the glow of its porch light now a beacon of both hope and uncertainty. As I approached the farmhouse, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving behind a lingering unease. The flickering lights seemed to dance in the wind, casting eerie shadows across the weathered facade. My footsteps echoed hollowly against the wooden porch as I reached for the doorbell, my hand trembling slightly. The door creaked open slowly, revealing an elderly man with kind eyes and a weather-beaten face. His voice was a comforting contrast to the chilling silence outside as he listened intently to my tale of the mysterious car and the terrifying encounter on the road. He nodded knowingly, his expression grave. "You're not the first one to come here with a story like that," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "There's been talk of strange happenings on these roads lately." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see the headlights of the menacing car glaring back at me. The old man must have noticed my unease, for he invited me inside with a reassuring smile. Inside the farmhouse, the warmth and flickering light of an old wood stove provided a stark contrast to the cold darkness outside. The walls were adorned with faded photographs and knickknacks that hinted at a lifetime of memories. The old man offered me a cup of hot tea, which I gratefully accepted, the warmth seeping into my chilled bones. As I sipped the tea, the old man recounted tales of other travelers who had sought refuge here, each with their own harrowing encounters on these desolate roads. Stories of phantom headlights that vanished into thin air, of eerie figures glimpsed in the shadows, and of inexplicable disappearances that left a haunting presence in their wake. Despite his attempts to reassure me, my mind remained fixated on the unsettling events of the night. Who was the driver of that car, and what had driven them to such reckless behavior? The unanswered questions gnawed at my thoughts like a relentless storm. Hours passed in the comforting embrace of the farmhouse, yet the night seemed endless. Eventually, as the first faint hints of dawn began to paint the horizon, the old man insisted on driving me back to my stranded car. Reluctantly, I bid farewell to the farmhouse and its comforting warmth, the memories of the night's events lingering like a ghostly echo. As we approached the spot where my car had broken down, I held my breath, half expecting the mysterious car to reappear. To my relief, there was no sign of it, only the quiet stillness of the countryside bathed in the soft light of dawn. With the old man's help, I managed to get my car started again, the engine purring to life like a reassuring heartbeat. As I drove away from that lonely stretch of road, leaving behind the farmhouse and its enigmatic tales, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than a mere breakdown. The memory of those headlights in the night, the fleeting glimpse of a face behind the wheel, haunted my thoughts for days to come. Perhaps it was just a random encounter with a reckless driver, fueled by a mix of fear and misunderstanding. Or perhaps, as the old man's stories hinted, there are forces at play in the darkness of night that defy explanation, leaving behind only unanswered questions and the unsettling sensation of being watched from the shadows. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: that lonely country road and the farmhouse at its end will forever remain etched in my memory as a place where reality blurred with the inexplicable, leaving me forever changed by the eerie encounter that unfolded in the dead of night. Story 2. Babysitting in the upscale neighborhood of Crestwood Heights was usually uneventful for me. The houses were large, the lawns immaculate, and the families generally kept to themselves. This particular evening, I was sitting for the Chambers, a new family in the area. Mr. and Mrs. Chambers were heading to a charity gala, leaving me in charge of their 2 children, Emily and Jacob. As the parents left, they reassured me that the kids should be asleep already, and that it would likely be a quiet night. With that, they departed, leaving me alone in their luxurious home. The Chambers house was spacious, filled with elegant furnishings and artwork that spoke of wealth and taste. It was a stark contrast to the small apartment I shared with roommates during college breaks. Emily, a precocious 7-year-old, insisted on showing me her room and telling me about her favorite toys before reluctantly agreeing to go to bed. Jacob, at 5, was easier to settle. He was already half asleep by the time I tucked him in. With the kids in bed and the house quiet, I settled into the living room, intending to catch up on some reading while waiting for the parents to return. An hour or so passed without incident. Then, faint noises from upstairs caught my attention. At first, I dismissed them as the settling of the house or perhaps the wind. However, they persisted, growing more distinct. Concerned, I quietly ascended the stairs, careful not to wake the children. I checked each room, Emily's, Jacob's. Everything seemed undisturbed until I reached the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out onto the hallway carpet. I hesitated, my heart thumping louder in my ears as I pushed the door open cautiously. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a small bedside lamp. The first thing I noticed was the open drawers of the large dresser against the wall. Someone had been searching through them. Frozen with fear, I watched as a figure turned abruptly towards me. A man, dressed in dark clothing, stood there, his hand still inside a drawer. Our eyes locked for a moment, shock reflected in both our faces. Then, without a word, he turned and darted towards the nearest window, crashing through it with a loud shatter of glass. My senses returned in a rush. I hurried downstairs, fumbling for my phone, and dialed 911. Breathlessly, I explained the situation to the dispatcher, urging them to send the police immediately. While waiting for their arrival, I locked all the doors and stayed with the children, who thankfully slept through the entire ordeal. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived, though in reality it was only minutes. They conducted a thorough search of the house and the surrounding area but found no trace of the intruder. All that remained of his presence were the shattered shards of glass and the eerie silence that hung over the house. Later that night, after the police had taken my statement and left, Mr. Chambers returned home. He and his wife were visibly shaken by what had transpired. Over cups of strong coffee in their kitchen, they explained that they had been receiving anonymous threats for several weeks but had dismissed them as pranks or empty warnings. The incident with the intruder, however, had changed everything. They decided to stay with friends for the night and arranged for additional security measures to be installed immediately. Despite their assurances that they would handle the situation, I couldn't help but feel shaken myself. The calm, affluent facade of Crestwood Heights had been shattered for me that night, revealing a darker underbelly of fear and vulnerability. In the days that followed, I found it difficult to concentrate. The image of the intruder's face haunted me, his sudden appearance and swift escape replaying in my mind whenever I closed my eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something far worse than a mere burglary. The Chambers, grateful for my actions that night, compensated me generously and assured me that they would no longer be taking any risks with their family's safety. They moved out of Crestwood Heights shortly after, opting for a more secure neighborhood where such incidents were less likely to occur. For me, babysitting would never be the same again. The innocence and trust I once associated with it had been replaced by a constant vigilance and awareness of the potential dangers lurking even in the most affluent of neighborhoods. As I returned to my own modest apartment, I vowed to always trust my instincts and never underestimate the threat that could be hiding behind a closed door or an open window. Story 3. As my friend Sarah and I ventured deeper into the dense, untouched wilderness of Willow Creek National Park, our adventurous spirits led us off the well-trodden path. The allure of discovery beckoned us as we veered into a less traveled area where the foliage grew thicker, casting dappled shadows in the afternoon sun.